And welcome to RealAg Politics, everybody. Hope you're having yourself a great Friday. Shaun Haney, along with my co-host Kelvin Heppner. Hey, Kelvin, how are you?
Doing well. The sun is shining here in southern Manitoba. It's a good day for fields to dry, and maybe we can get back to seedings sooner than later.
Oh,
How are you, Shaun?
please, please, man. I'm just so hopeful that people in eastern Saskatchewan and Manitoba can get this crop in, crop progress. When the days are there, the crop gets in. So you kind of showed that last week. So hopefully that weather reverses itself and you can push some of that moisture our way out here to Alberta, and because we could use it. You had more rain this week than we've had in the last 6 months.
We'll gladly share, and it's the same the week before and the week before and the week before. So it's opposite story.
Southern Alberta continues to be drier than the moon. I think that's fact at this point, not just speculation on my part. Okay, RealAg Politics today. We're going to take a bit of a different tack today. What we've been doing over the past several episodes is we've been having, one guest, and they're here for the entire hour. Today we're doing a little bit different. We are going to basically have 3 different segments, and I'm looking forward to it. Provides a little bit more technical challenge on my end as the producer as well here, but we're going to give it our best shot, so please bear with us. We are live today on, we're doing YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, I believe. So lots of different places to get your comments and questions in. So please do so because we are live here. Kelvin, let's not wait any further. Let's bring in our first guest. You got it? Do you hear me? You got me still?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay, Let's bring in our first guest. Here we go. It is Tom Steve. He's the general manager with Alberta Wheat and Barley Commissions. Hey, Tom, how are you doing?
I'm good, guys. Good to be with you.
Yeah.
Welcome, Tom.
It's good to have you here. So, Tom, we wanted to have you here to talk about your perspective at Alberta Wheat and Barley Commissions, and when you can, maybe the Alberta perspective, if you feel like talking for Team Alberta. The Canadian Ag Policy Framework, it expires in March of 23. It's being worked on. We have an FPT meeting coming up here in July that I believe is in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, if I've got that, my memory serves me correctly. From Alberta Wheat and Barley's perspective, what are some of the key things that you've been pushing to Minister Horner in Alberta and maybe some of the national organizations like the grain growers that you work with, or maybe the feds when you talk to them as well? What are your key priorities that you need to have in this new agreement?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, guys. And I think the number one priority that we have in Alberta, and I think it's common across the Western provinces, is to keep the crop insurance program that we have whole. It's maybe news to some people that not all of Canada places the same value on crop insurance, but last year, with the worst drought in 20 years, did we ever see the value of crop insurance? And we certainly saw it in Alberta. I think the payout was 1.47 billion. That's with a B. And it's a reliable program. I mean, it's not cheap for farmers to enroll, but we are going to we have already experienced significant increases in premiums this year. But year in, year out, crop insurance is the most reliable tool that farmers have. The second part of it would be we have some major concerns about cross-compliance potentially coming into the equation with business risk management programs. In other words, farmers would have to demonstrate that they are doing best management practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions or contribute to carbon sequestration. In our opinion, strong opinion, business risk management programs need to be decoupled from the climate change and greenhouse gas emission agenda of the federal government, because business risk management programs are just that. They're not climate emission reduction programs. They are designed to protect farmers when they have a significant disruption in their production. So to connect the two of those, I think, is a major issue for us. The third one is what we're hearing in the agri-science program. So a part of the ag policy framework is all of the shared cost programs in research that crop commissions like ours participate in with the Government of Canada. We're being told that, at least 15% of all programs must comply with the government's greenhouse gas emission and carbon emission reduction agenda to be able to qualify for funding. And in talking to most crop groups in Canada, that is not an achievable objective. And the final part of that is for example, all crop commissions are negotiating what we call the research clusters, which would be in wheat, barley, canola, pulses, you name it. And we're being told that matching funding from the federal government will be 70-30 if it complies with their greenhouse gas emission and climate change goals, and it'll be 50-50 if it does not. So the 50-50 that does not would logically apply to programs that might increase yields or productivity or increase our competitiveness. It's possible that some of the ones that fit into that other bucket would, but we're being told loudly and clearly by the Government of Canada that a big part of the policy framework, the majority of it for that matter, is tied to their climate change and greenhouse gas emission reduction targets.
Going back to the crop insurance concerns, Tom, do you have any word from I know it was confirmed at the Ag Committee a couple of weeks ago. I saw in Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada officials confirm that they are seriously looking at integrating some of these criteria, this environmental climate greenhouse gas emissions criteria into BRM programs. But do you have any idea what that could look like with crop insurance? Would you get a lower premium if you if you were enrolled in an environmental farm plan program or something like that? Or do you have any idea what is on the table, what they are looking at?
No, not at all. And we're involved in various discussions with our own provincial government. And I don't think that's been quantified at all. But I think when you say that you might apply for a lower premium, what we're concerned about is a higher premium if you don't.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Tom, what we've heard from some organizations is a real push here to expand the pie. That this program needs to receive more funding in the go forward. It has not kept up with inflation. It has been a flat number. Is that something that you've been talking to people about?
Yes, definitely we have been. It's that funding envelope has not expanded, and I don't think the last couple of versions of the ag policy framework. And further to that point, we would like to see more funding to potentially offset the impact of the climate change and greenhouse gas emission policies of the Government of Canada. But I think that should be outside of the business risk management program envelope. The Government of Canada has made policy decisions that could fundamentally impact our competitiveness in global markets. No question about that. If you look at fertilizer emission reduction targets alone, and we don't have time to talk about that, but that's a big issue. The potential of moving the Pest Management Regulatory Agency away from science-based decisions to decisions based on some criteria that we still don't quite understand. But on the one hand, the government of Canada is encouraging us to be a global leader in exports, and but it sort of feels like we're standing on the board we're trying to lift in some cases with some of the policies that are being put in front of us. There have been some announcements of programs like the OFCAF program. I'm not sure you're familiar with it, but the government is throwing out minor programs that might offset some of the impacts of their policies, but we're talking about a solution that would be in the billions of dollars, in my opinion.
Yeah. Are you concerned that, like you say, the pot hasn't increased? We have all of these new requirements or expectations that the government is, or strings that the government is attaching to these projects. On top of that, we have just the basic inflation that's happened, where a dollar spent today doesn't go as far as it did the last time this agreement was negotiated. Are those arguments gaining any traction in terms of your conversations with the provincial minister and in turn what's happening at the federal level?
I can only speak to our conversations with our provincial minister and what we hear from the other Western provinces, and I think definitely we're of the same mind. The real question is the federal government. The mandate letter of the current minister is very clear that the focus is on climate change, greenhouse gas emission reduction, sustainability. And those are all honorable pursuits. But at the same time, we have to be competitive in the global market or we're not going to survive. And we have a number of anchors that are being potentially imposed on us to be competitive globally. And that's the concern.
Tom, what are you hearing from your members in regards to the state of agri-stability? And Alberta, it's kind of a mixed bag in the sense there is some pockets where there has been a crop last year, and there's areas, and I'm in one of them, where there really wasn't, and right now we are really struggling again. Ranchers, which is outside of your scope, is also have their own concerns about agri-stability. But what are you hearing from your members at Alberta Wheat and Barley in terms of agri-stability, and what possibly needs to change going forward?
It varies widely by farmer, but there are those that participate in agri-stability as kind of an add-on. It's not very expensive to participate. It compared to crop insurance, for example, but the triggering of a payment is still an issue for so many producers that don't have an army of accountants behind them, and they tend to just say, "Well, I'm just not going to play in that market." And there's a big constituency of those. We made some pretty good arguments at this time. Well, last summer. For the government of Alberta to participate in the modest changes to agri-stability, and they didn't accept all of them. But I don't think it was, it wasn't an issue or a hill to die on for the majority of Alberta farmers. The fact of the matter is we're going to be dealing with agri-stability in this upcoming policy framework, because there's been very little discussion on path forward. Minister Dreeshen, when he was there, brought forward the idea of a margin-based insurance program, but those programs take years and years and years to develop. And I think, we're, I don't want to use the term stuck with, but we kind of are. stuck with agri-stability. And some farmers really that have the ability to withstand crop failures and wait for a payout will use it. And those that don't, it just can't afford the risk and the timing. And I don't know if I'm capturing that fully, but that's what I hear for the most part.
Yeah, good stuff. Tom, thanks so much for joining us here today on RealAg Politics. Really appreciate your perspective. You have you understand all the inner workings of this very, very well, based on your experiences on the producer side as well, on on the industry side as well. So really appreciate you sharing your perspective here today on RealAg Politics.
Yeah, great to talk to you guys.
Thanks, Tom. That went quick.
Yeah, it did. It's amazing how fast it does go. Okay, Tom, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Okay, Kelvin, we got to keep. This is fun. We're that was great. That expanded pie. I think that's something that we're no matter you're in the livestock side, you're in Eastern Canada, Western Canada, wherever we're just hearing that message. The pot's got to get bigger. And I'm not sold on the fact it's actually going to happen, but it's definitely a common request that we are hearing. So should we bring in our next guest, do you think?
Do it.
Let's do it. Okay. Coming up next, it is just hold on. I gotta maneuver here. So remove from green room. Okay. Our next guest is Deb Conlon. She is with the Grain Farmers of Ontario. Hey, Deb, how are you?
Good. How about you?
Hey, we're doing great. We're doing great.
Doing good.
Okay, Deb.
All recovered from your election party last night.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it wraps up early, really, right? Like I was just saying that
You're right.
normally you stay up till 2 a.m. watching all the speeches, but I think it all ended around 11:30. So it wasn't that much fun.
Yeah, Deb, I think all week I've kind of been describing the lead up to election night is a little bit of kind of like a ho hum in a sense, where we really just it was quiet. And then, like, we get the result last night, and Premier Ford really essentially just rolls right over the NDP and the Liberals. Even gained in places like the GTA, which is something that conservatives across the country have sort of struggled in urban areas. You've been in the political game for a long time. What's your reaction to what we saw last night in terms of the vote turnout for Premier Ford?
Yeah, well, it was kind of a crazy night, really, when you think going into it, people were saying he might have a minority, and he comes out with a big, giant majority and gains seats. I guess he ran on like getting her done or gonna get her done or however he said it, and I guess that resonated with people, right? I mean, it was kind of interesting to see him, pick up those seats like in Essex and Northern Ontario too. Those I understand the one in Essex hasn't been PC for 60 years, right? So that's a pretty big coup. I mean, the people who ran that campaign, I guess they're very data driven, and I guess they knew what they were doing, right? I would say, like, from my perspective, it was kind of boring. I almost had to remind myself to vote yesterday because you just didn't see it coming. But you could see that he was pretty elated. Sometimes when I look at him, he's not really your typical conservative. If you talk to some people who are in the Conservative Party, they don't love him even, but he's like, I would think kind of like a Bill Davis. I wasn't in Ontario at the time, but the way people reminisce about Bill Davis, he's like a nation builder. And even last night when you heard Ford, he was like, we developed Ford Nation, and it's working, I guess, right? So it speaks to how he handled the pandemic. And I bet you Jason Kenney's like, what the heck? How did he do that? And I'm like, out on the door.
Yeah. From an agriculture perspective, Deb, what does anything change now for farmers in Ontario? It's basically status quo?
Um, well, I mean, I think from our perspective, no matter how our members vote, both parties, we have at GFO, we have had good relationships with whoever's leading the office of the Minister of Agriculture. But this definitely, keeps this past 4 years going to the next 4 years. And I mean, one of the biggest things we're excited about is right before the election, Crosby had a conversation with Premier Ford, and he promised to work on increasing the RMP envelope, which you were just talking to Tom about, how agri-stability just doesn't work for farmers. And the solution on the table right now is an 80% payout increase, which would also not work for grain farmers. So it would be really nice to see that RMP money, get put into the pot so that it's there to deal with the big issues, which we're going to see on input prices continuing, right? So that cost of production formula just really works for our farmers. And the only problem with RMP is it doesn't have enough money, right?
Mm.
So that's a good is a good thing from that standpoint.
Yeah, you referenced the conversation with Tom. One of the questions that we asked him, and we're going to get to I got more election questions, but I want to just continue with this line of thinking, is expanding that pie. The overall Canadian ag policy framework has not kept up with inflation. Is that something that you have been pushing the Ford government on, and Minister Thompson, in terms of this pie's got to get bigger?
We have, yeah, definitely. I mean, we've been running since I've been here a campaign basically on that, really on the BRM file, right? There just isn't enough of a program to protect when prices dropped on the agri-stability. I don't know what the latest number is, but it's under 15% of our farmers actually subscribe to agri-stability. And about 5 years ago, we lobbied to get the disconnect between RMP and agri-stability, just because they didn't want to have to comply with one in order to get the other, because it's just that useless. There's a couple of other things coming up, on business risk management, and that's around and the APF in general, the cross compliance that's going to be required for or is being contemplated in this next policy framework to deliver on climate change and other sustainability objectives, which is really I don't know what the word is, but disappointing to see, because it's a $3 billion program that hasn't had any increases for the last 10 years. Tarper cut it on the agri-stability, and now they want to get more out of it. It's doesn't seem like the time, right? Doesn't even reflect inflation. And then if you see them looking at things like crop insurance and asking for environmental outcomes, I think you guys know this. If you were to mention that to a farmer anywhere across Canada, that would not that dog doesn't hunt, right? Like, nobody's going to like that.
So is there a way to, if they increase the funding to it, would there be a way to integrate that criteria, or is it a completely non-starter where it needs to be kept separate, and these environmental incentive programs need to not be part of what we have as business risk management, Deb?
Well, I think on the business risk management, if you talk to a farmer, they're saying, like, if I lose money or if I lose yield, I don't want money to build a fence post, right? Like, I need money to offset the losses that I have. And that's the way the business risk management program has always been set up. And if you really look at what's going on in the world right now, the terrible tragedy that's happening in Ukraine, the everybody's saying there's going to be people going hungry, and starting in June, we saw two riots already in Iran and Sri Lanka, and then they're predicting that's going to happen, just days from now, really, in June. We're in June already. And so you've seen Europe step back and say, like, are we really on the right track with farms to forks? Maybe we should set that aside and just focus on productivity, right? The U.S. also expanding acres. There's people in the EU not being paid to grow forage anymore because they need to grow food. And, I don't see Canada making that same move. And I think they probably should be really getting on board on that right away, because Canada has a moral obligation to really deliver as much food as they can for the world. So when you ask me that question about BRMs, I think when you're a farmer and you're going in and you subscribe to a BRM program, it's order to offset your risks that you're seeing, not to deliver on some other program. So I think it would be best if they, separated out that objective and funded it, because inserting it into everything loses its objective. That's a long answer, but
Deb, one of the
Makes
GFO
sense.
priorities for the election was to deal with supply chain challenges, in particular what's happened with fertilizer. Farmers in Ontario greatly impacted by the disruption in supply of fertilizer from Belarus and from Russia. Now that the election is over, is this something that the GFO will be working with Minister Thompson to try to sort this out with the federal government? Minister Bibeau confirmed that Canada is the only G7 country that has applied these sorts of sanctions on fertilizer out of that region. So where do we go from here?
yeah, I mean, Minister Thompson was incredibly helpful leading up to this spring, because, as you know, one of the bigger issues in the short term was getting that supply here, because you couldn't have boats coming in from Russia. And 30% of our fertilizer supply was relying on that. So she was really helpful with getting that on the agenda of the federal government. And then the federal government was really helpful in getting those boats through. So that was one piece of this story. The second piece of the story is that there continues to be sanctions, and the tariffs that were on that fertilizer that did come in is now being charged to farmers. And that's a big bill to pay for farmers, right? So we've been talking to the federal government about getting that money passed back. It doesn't look like they're going to give it directly back to the fertilizer companies. That's pretty certain right now. But we've been promised that there'll be something for farmers here, and I don't know if it's going to be in terms of a check, but I think that's what farmers want it to be. And there's a role for Minister Thompson to help us do that. There's an FPT meeting today, and I'm not sure if she ended up being able to attend it because it's the day after the election, but we asked her to raise that if she was the person who did attend it. And I would guess that they are, because this is a pretty big deal, right?
So that would be a check would certainly be more than the changes that Minister Bibeau has talked about so far in terms of the tweaking that they made to the advance payments program.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that was something that they did right away. We've told them that isn't enough, right? Getting a loan isn't going to cover those costs, and the conversation goes on.
What about in the longer term, in the GFO election special that people should watch or listen to? It's on Real Agriculture, where it features conversations with representatives from all the parties. There was a fair bit of discussion, Deb, about in the longer term investing in domestic fertilizer production capacity and addressing some of these supply constraints. Is there a serious effort? Do you feel there's enough momentum behind that conversation to actually look at sourcing fertilizer elsewhere, whether it's made in Ontario or whether it comes from Western Canada?
Yeah, so we've commissioned a study with StoneX to do an analysis of the situation, right? Is to look at, okay, what if you had a domestic solution? What if you had a Fortress North America solution? What does the world market look like? Because I think what they're predicting right now is this is going to go on, the shortages, till 2024, regardless of where Russia is at in the whole distribution of fertilizer. And so that's one piece of it. And then we want to get to the table, which we hope to do with the people who are going to make these decisions, because what we don't want to see is people coming up with a wacky idea, right? And then the money goes towards that, and then we're left either with a fertilizer shortage or a high cost of fertilizer. Each one of these solutions that I mean I mentioned, they have cost to them, right? So if you're going to make it out west, then can you rail it? How much is that going to cost? Interfering with a global fertilizer supply, and it has an impact on price, which ultimately has an impact on the farmer, and then has an impact on our ability to grow the food, back to what I was saying. So
what can we expect out of biofuels in the go forward? That was another one of the GFO election priorities that we covered in the special, and pressed the four parties on. This push towards E15 and trying to accelerate that. Obviously, we also have the what we formerly called the Clean Fuel Standard. That is a new name that totally escapes me off the top of my head. I apologize to all the Canadian biofuel industry, but where do we see biofuels go forward here under the regime of the Ford government?
So the Ford government saw biofuels as a really important part of their climate change strategy, which was pretty exciting to see. And there's a commitment to E15, and I can't remember the date, but in the future here, in the next few years. And what we've asked them to do in the election, in our conversations with them, is what they're doing in the US, which is, why don't you pump up the volume of ethanol in the fuel pool, so that consumers can have a break on their price of gasoline, right? So that's why Biden did it, and that's what we've asked the provincial government to do. They're going to get there anyway, so why not do it now? He's already giving a break on taxes this summer, he said. So it would be nice to see that as another thing, and it gives an opportunity for farmers not to just reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the fuel consumption, but also to help people in their pocketbook.
Kelvin, oh, sorry, go ahead, Deb.
No, you asked me about the federal regulation.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Go ahead.
I mean, I think that is going to set up. There was some real heartburn in the beginning on that one, back to trying to get something on the environment on farm, and that has been rectified as far as we know. I mean, we haven't seen the final thing now, but that whole business about getting the farmer to do certain things if they were growing crops for ethanol is gone out of the discussion now. And if that goes through, I mean, I think that sets up a nice framework for driving demand for both corn ethanol, and probably a little less corn ethanol, but for oil seeds going into renewable diesel.
Yep. And we've got a webinar coming up, Kelvin, renewable diesel.
We do, yes.
That's a good segue by Deb there. That was good. I like that.
Is that right?
We do.
Yeah, with Bob Day of Ceres, which is, they're building a canola crush plant in Saskatchewan with an eye on the renewable diesel market that's coming. So when are those regulations? That's later this year. Are we still expecting them in fall? When is what's the timeline for that?
The last I heard, I think it's like any day now. But
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's been some consultations that have taken place, but that's a pretty cool market. Like, if you see what's going on in the States on renewable diesel, it is cool. I mean, I worked for Greenfield, I guess almost 10 years ago, and these were just notions that people were talking about happening, and now they're actually happening on a large scale. It's pretty cool, and then they're going to happen on a global scale, it looks like, when this particular regulation is going to help facilitate that kind of investment here in Canada. And maybe we won't see a soybean renewable diesel plant in Montreal, but maybe we will. But ultimately, this North American market is gonna provide that demand that's going to be good for soybean growers.
Absolutely. And that webinar is next Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern, 1 o'clock Mountain, like Kelvin said, with Robert Day, who is the CEO of Ceres Global Ag. So you can go to realagriculture.com/webinar to sign up for that. Hey, Deb, thank you so much for joining us here today. Always insightful. Really appreciate the passion. and keep up the great work there at the GFO.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, Deb.
Okay. Wow. We've covered a lot of ground so far. It's interesting, Kelvin. You compare what we heard from Deb to what Tom Steve said from over Wheat and Barley Commission, kind of singing the same songbook, East and West, when it comes to what they want to see out of the coming ag policy framework.
For sure, the cross-compliance issue that Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada is looking at in terms of implementing criteria or incentives, some sort of additional strings attached, again, on crop insurance potentially, maybe other business risk management programs when it comes to environmental outcomes. That's something that I think is a concern across the board. She did share the idea of checks being sent to farmers to offset the sanctions on fertilizer. I didn't realize that the discussions were that far along that Minister Thompson would be potentially bringing that to an FPT meeting that's happening today.
Yeah. I actually didn't even realize there was an FPT meeting today. So that was...
I knew there was one in early June. I didn't know the day, but yeah, it sounds like it's happening today.
There you go. Okay, we've got one more segment coming up here on RealAg Politics. Appreciate everybody tuning in here. This is fantastic. Let's bring in our next guest. It is Tyler McCann. He is with CAPI as well as Callum Morrison. And let's go. There we are. Full screen. Hey, guys. How's it going?
Great, Shaun.
Fantastic,
Kelvin,
thank
how are
you.
you this afternoon?
We are doing great. We are discussing numerous issues, and we've heard from both Alberta Wheat and Barley Commissions, as well as you just saw Deb Conlon from the GFO. So lots of great stuff. And this week, where we want to go with you is that we saw a report from the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. We talked about it on RealAg Radio with one of the senior fellows, Lisa Ashton. And we wanted to break it down a little bit further with you here today. It's about translating science to policy, approaches to increase soil carbon sequestration in Canada's croplands. Tyler, I guess overarching here, what is CAPI trying to accomplish? What's the objective?
Well, I want to start by highlighting the 4 doctoral fellows that contributed to this report. These are young students that are doing their PhD. They came together from a variety of different backgrounds. You know, a lot of the work that we've done over the years has highlighted the need for people of different backgrounds, you know, soil scientists, agronomists, social scientists, political scientists to come together, work together to try and find solutions that work for agriculture. And so our doctoral fellows came together to look at this issue around soil carbon, around how do we improve sustainability, but how do we take what we know from a science perspective and then translate that into a policy perspective. And so it had people, Callum has done a lot of good work on cover cropping as he's been going to school, working alongside people that look at it more from a policy angle and trying to find ways to make those two things work better together.
I was going to ask if you guys planned your matching background walls. That's what caught my attention.
we're not quite that coordinated, I guess, but just luck of the draw. Callum got a haircut. I didn't get that. Weren't that coordinated.
Oh, okay.
Kelvin, go ahead.
So in terms of Callum, I know we've talked before about your cover crop research. Callum's actually my neighbor too, by the way, guys. So we get to see each other in town once in a while or around the area. But, your cover crop research, how do you see that fitting into this discussion about carbon sequestration, Callum, and as to implement policies to move in this direction? Oh, it looks like my screen's freezing. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, maybe say your question again.
Could you rephrase? Not rephrase. Repeat the question, please. I'm sorry.
Sure. Just how do you see your cover crop research contributing to the outcomes that this paper is looking at and the recommendations that are put forward in it?
Oh, okay. I see. I think particularly out in Western Canada, we're still in the early stages of cover crop research, and I see cover crops potentially playing a big role in the future of sequestering carbon on the prairies. But I think we really do need quite a bit more data, a lot more research, and a lot more really trying to understand what's happening with cover crops in this region, because it is very complicated in that there's many different, obviously, regions and many different types of cover crops that are grown to reach different goals. And each of these will have different opportunities to sequester carbon. And so I think it will become clearer as we invest in more research over time.
That seems to be an underlying theme of this report, that we need more
Yes.
work on research, more backing data to support policies. And is that fair to sum it up that way, Tyler?
Yeah, I think so, Kelvin. I think that one of the things that your listeners will know is agriculture is a complex, dynamic system, right? It is different across the country, and what works in one place may not work in the other. And we need to have a better understanding of how the system works, what influences, again, in this case, soil organic carbon, what are the practices that are there, but then also better understand the ways that we can incent and assist farmers with adoption of practices, the way that we can find durable solutions to it. We don't have as good of an understanding as we should when it comes to a lot of these things. Callum's work on cover cropping and has highlighted, financial incentives are part of it, but they're not the only part of it. There's a lot of other barriers to adoption. There's a lot of other ways that public and private actors can help farmers adopt solutions. And I think, again, this report highlights the need for a complex approach and a dynamic approach to getting farmers to adopt practices that improve environmental outcomes.
But Tyler, are you concerned that we're not willing to put in that work to sort of, because I totally agree. The regional differences here is a real stumbling block. It's a barrier, and it's real. What works for Callum maybe in Manitoba, especially with you look at the moisture that Manitoba's had this year, and you compare that to what's going on in, say, East End, Saskatchewan, those are totally different worlds, and they're both on the prairies. So how do we get people over the hump here to realize we have to consider these regional differences as we come up with what are the best management practices to build carbon in the soil?
I think that first there's got to be a recognition that we need different approaches in different places in the country, and we haven't always seen that. We've seen, I think, some people prefer to pursue simple solutions. At the same time, we have seen the federal government with their Living Labs initiative. I think it's a step in the right direction, where they're trying to build research centers across the country, but build these sites in collaboration with the producer communities that take a more of an integrated approach to research and knowledge transfer. That helps, I think, identify or recognize this reality that things are going to look different, and we need to better understand what's going to work and what's not going to work, and what tools are going to be there. A big part of that is that involving the local producer community. We've got to make sure that research is there in a big way. But I think if you look at what's happening in the United States, the U.S. government is in the middle of rolling out $1 billion program around carbon pilot projects to identify different practices, different solutions that work some places. I think that they're recognizing really that we're at an early stage here. They're investing a lot of money, again, $1 billion just in pilot projects. Our federal government's taken a step, maybe gone a step beyond that by creating a fund to pay farmers for specific practices. I think we need to do a better job of recognizing that maybe we need to better understand those agronomic, social, environmental conditions that are at play before we get too focused on a specific list of actions that farmers should be undertaking. I do think it's important to recognize that a lot of the things that farmers are doing are already the right things, right? I don't think, if you look at the practices that they're using, that the changes that they're already making, the growers that are already growing cover crops, or that are already using variable rate, or that are already adopting precision agriculture, a lot of the times they're doing this absent a government program. Again, I think it's an example of how sometimes it's incentives beyond just financial incentives from government that encourages farmers to do one thing or the other. We need to look at this differently, more holistically, more systematically.
Callum, can you speak to that further too, in terms of your research, what you found in terms of what drove farmers to make decisions to adopt cover crops?
Yes, well, I have to say that Tyler's response is just fantastic. It really highlights, you can tell that this is something he thinks about a lot. Now, yes, I'd say farmers choose to grow cover crops for many different reasons. And I think one thing which is quite important to say, the 281 farmers that grow a cover crop that I surveyed, they grew cover crops without government incentives. And not one of those 281 farmers I spoke to told me that the old system worked better. So that's showing that farmers are growing them across a variety of geographical areas on the prairies. I have a map in my report which shows people growing it. Red River Valley, where I live, we've had dry past few years, right the way into the Peace River. So it's showing to me it is happening without financial incentives, and it's showing that quite often farmers' networks are very, very important for adopting. And I think it's showing that even though financial incentives, I think, would be helpful for getting some people off over that initial sort of barrier, I think a lot of things, a lot of value should be placed in investing in research, extension, and really trying to foster and grow these networks so that farmers know where to get accurate information about cover crops. And when we think about research, I think we really need to start thinking about how different types of researchers can work together. So I think we need to have traditional sort of plot research, but I think on-farm research, similar to what we're doing with my professor at the University of Manitoba, where we're actually having a look at cover crops grown on-farm, in how farmers are actually doing that on farm and the effects they're having. But also, I think we need a lot of research to really understand why farmers make decisions in Canada, how they adopt, and just trying to have a very multidisciplinary approach to looking at cover crop use. So bringing in people who have understanding of social sciences, because the fact is, farmers adopt cover crops, and understanding farmer decisions, I think, is just as important as understanding the what is happening on the ground.
Tyler, whether it's cover crops or it's other best management practices that are developed, depending on the region that you're in, one of the things that I think I really identified with in the report is the need for there to be more focus on ROI. And getting the idea of building carbon in the soil across the finish line with a lot of farmers, there's some that are going to identify and cling on very much to the ideological, it's the right thing to do, but we have to, rubber has to hit the road with the money side of things, and we have to be able to prove and map out ROI. That's something that has been missing. Can you address that?
Well, I think it's more than just ROI. I mean, ultimately, it has to make sense, right? Because again, you can do things on paper, pencil out, but maybe your crop rotations or your equipment that you have. Again, these can be complicated decisions. We have to find solutions that work. But one of the things that we haven't done a good job of that should be part of that ROI calculation is encouraging carbon markets. Voluntary carbon markets are being used around the world. They see there's a potential in the United States for it to be a $5 billion commodity in the future. Somebody mentioned the On-Farm Climate Action Fund program that the federal government's rolled out. There's some concern that farmers that receive funding from it may not actually be able to access voluntary carbon markets. And I think that's unfortunate, because if you look at that ROI, if you're looking at building the right kind of financial framework that encourages farmers to adopt these practices, to adopt the BMPs that are going to improve soil outcomes, the reality is we probably need to use an all of the above approach. We need to find ways for people to be able to access the government funding, but we need to be able to add voluntary incentives and payments on top of it. We need to be able to look at, again, different combinations of payments for different reasons to really add the most incentive as possible. But I do want to go back to, often these aren't just financial incentives. I think that there's, again, some sense out there that if you just pay farmers enough money, you'll get them to do X, Y, or Z, or implement whatever BMP is there. It's not as simple as that. These need to make sense. They need to make sense for the farmer. They need to make sense for the farming system that they're using. And they need to deliver those meaningful outputs at the end of the day. One of the things that we often take for granted is that changing soil organic carbon content, that's a slow process that happens over a period of years. We can't just expect farmers are going to adopt a practice one year and things are going to change. So we have to understand that these are long-term commitments that need to be made, and we need to have the right long-term framework in place to encourage and reward and then maintain the practices and the benefits that come.
Yep.
Tyler, further on your comments about carbon credit or offset markets, are you concerned the government is shooting itself in the foot in terms of announcing these programs where they're going to fund projects on farm, but ultimately they're not creating a framework where the market itself is incentivizing the adoption of different outcomes, and they're taking away the ability of the farmers who participate in these programs, the ability to access those offsets, or there is the potential of that as you outlined with the on-farm climate action fund?
Yeah, Kelvin, I'm concerned Canada's falling behind. I'm concerned that the Americans, the Australians, the Europeans are getting ahead of us from this perspective. If depending on the BMPs and the practices that we're talking about, these can be significant costs. These can, and sometimes the public and private incentives that are in place on their own as one incentive aren't enough, but we need to find ways to be able to combine them together. But ultimately, if we want to be a leader in this space, we need to look at innovative policy solutions. And a lot of that's going to come from finding ways to make private solutions and public solutions work better together. There's a report out of Europe that on voluntary carbon markets, and it talked about the reality is that government markets tend to be very rigid, tend not to be very flexible, tend to be closer to kind of a one size fits all, where voluntary markets can be a bit more innovative, can do different things, can pilot different approaches, and talks about what you need is both really to get the best outcomes. And I worry that in Canada we haven't recognized fully, or we don't fully appreciate that we need both. It's important to recognize voluntary carbon markets, like any carbon market, isn't a silver bullet. These aren't, again, as we talk about with a lot of this, these aren't simple solutions, but they should be part of the solution, and it should probably be getting more attention than it does in Canada. It's certainly getting attention in the rest of the world.
Well, guys, really appreciate you joining us here today. Great stuff in the report. As Lisa Ashton said, we were talking on RealAg Radio earlier this week. She's like, "Did you write the report?" There's a lot in there that we kind of identify with. We've been talking about it on Real Agriculture. So the barriers are real, and the question is, what are we going to do? What it takes to get through those barriers to have not just a policy, but good policy, because that's kind of what we should be one of our objectives here. So,
Shaun, sorry if I can just add, I think good policy is going to come from producers. The report talks about producer engagement. We need producers to be coming forward to the table with real positive policy proposals, and I think that's something that farmers across the country and the groups that are working with them need to work harder on.
Well put. Callum and Tyler, thanks so much for joining us here on RealAg Politics.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thanks,
Cheers.
guys.
Okay, Kelvin, look at that. We actually did that quite well, having 3 different segments. I'm pretty impressed. I'm kind of happy that went as smoothly as it did. So, what's your takeaways from what you heard from Callum and Tyler there?
Oh, I agree completely, and I think maybe the arguments that they make in this report, which people should read if they haven't already, I think it sums up the issue quite well. They maybe make those arguments in a bit more scientific and polished, politically diplomatic way than what we do here on in our commentary sometimes. But
what are you trying to say?
Well, we operate in we have different audiences sometimes. So I think
we do.
The idea that there needs to be more research and commitment to research to actually understanding carbon sequestration and differences across the country, differences regionally, farming practices that are different, and actually quantify. Like, ultimately, all the government right now cares about is that bottom line, that emissions number, and being able to say that emissions from agriculture have dropped this much. So that's a pretty simplistic view on it, and it's completely at the other end of the spectrum versus what agriculture is like. We know how complex agriculture is and how difficult it is to quantify things and have the same outcome in 2 different farms that are neighbors, never mind 2 different farms across the country. So that's where, as the report says, I believe 2 out of the 3 main recommendations were around the idea of more research, or increased research, foster greater multidisciplinary research. So those are the idea that we need to have some better data and understanding. Actually, all 3 recommendations. The other one
Yeah.
was to develop a better understanding of how individual BMPs impact carbon sequestration. So it's maybe we're beating a drum that we've said before, but I agree completely with them. And to me, Callum's role, he's an example of the type of multidisciplinary research that has to be done to understand what's happening on the landscape and how those ideas, different concepts get implemented and why farmers make the decisions that they do.
Yeah, extension, also a part of that. We didn't even get to that in the discussion as well, that this is an area where there needs to be more extension. And that's kind of at a time where extension sort of from a budget standpoint, sort of under attack. So, is that something we're willing to do and buck up and put our money where our mouth is too, from a tax dollar perspective, or private industry as well? Got some comments here. Kara talking about the opening music. It does sound like that riff is from an AC/DC. There's little moments there where you can kind of hear that. Yeah, AC/DC's there somewhere, somehow.
Are you Bon Scott then, or Shaun, or who's coming in with the AC/DC voice?
Oh, I like both. Brian Johnson's good too.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the collections are so large on both ends. I think it's a different discussion when you get to Van Halen with Sammy and Eddie. But anyway, or David Lee Roth, sorry. Lindsay wanted to count how many times Kelvin said inflation. I think maybe once.
I think I only said it once. I think you said it just as often, if not more.
We'd have to play back the tape. Now, Ken has an apology. Ken is a frequent listener, Kelvin, and he wants to apologize to you. Because a couple weeks ago on this show, he said we needed the Canadian version of Jim Wiesmeyer, and just because he's not 60, Kelvin slipped my mind. I think that was on the RealAg Radio after show where this came up, because we had Jim on the show, and Ken had said, how come we don't have a Canadian Jim Wiesmeyer? And we were like, it's Kelvin. No. So there you go.
I will apologize to Ken. I disagree. we do need a Canadian Jim Wiesmeyer. There's so many things in Ottawa and provincial capitals too that happens on agriculture files that don't get talked about. There needs to be more attention on this stuff because it makes an impact, and unfortunately we need somebody. Yeah, we need more people following this stuff, and that's what we're trying to do with this show, I guess. Trying to get more conversation happening around a lot of this ag policy stuff that maybe doesn't get the attention it deserves until it's too late where everybody's up in arms. Why is this happening?
Boy, I'll tell you what, no kidding. That is one of the goals here, is try to break some of this stuff down so everybody understands. And the other piece, which is very similar to a lot of the other stuff we do at Real Agriculture, is sort of trying to make the country smaller. Okay. And so we had Tom Steve on, we had Deb Conlon on. Totally, different ends of the country. The Canadian Shield separates, plus a lot of land in between. But similar messaging when you get down to it. So I think that I also appreciate that. And there is differences too, don't get me wrong. But I always enjoy that part of it too, bringing people together from different areas of Canada. I want to encourage everybody. I tried to bring the graphic on the screen and I was just going to screw it up. So I'll just tell you again, realagriculture.com/webinar. Next Thursday, 3 o'clock Eastern, you can join us for our members-only Real Agriculture webinar on renewable diesel with Robert Day, CEO of Series Global Ag. So that is realagriculture.com/webinar. Okay, and if you have any troubles, whatever, just send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, and I'll help you out to make sure you get signed up, because we've had a lot of interest, and I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. We try to see what the implications are for Canada as well as American members of our audience as well. Hey, Kelvin, have yourself a great weekend.
Thank you. Everyone else as well.
Encourage everybody to also tune in this afternoon to RealAg Radio, 4:30 Eastern on Rural Radio 147. And of course, if you missed any of this show, or you missed, or you're going to miss RealAg Radio, encourage you to download the podcast as well. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Politics. Have yourselves a great weekend, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks for this show. Again, cheers.